I think it's actually really crucial right now that we get these stories down and out there to share so people can feel humanity, feel connected, feel loved and heard, that they're special, that everybody is special, and everybody's story is needed, is necessary.
Hello, this is Cate with the Thrive with Cate podcast, and I'm talking with Susan Weiss-Bolin of Breathe Ayurveda, and her other site is her name, Susan Weiss-Bolin, WEISBOHLEN.com. And Susan just released a new book, The Beginner's Guide to Ayurvedic Home Remedies.
I have it here. And back there, you can't see it that well back there, but it's here.
It's beautiful. So we're going to get into Ayurvedic home remedies and how the book's organized and how to use it. And then we're also going to get into the writing process. Susan also offers writing retreats that are writing as part of the healing journey. So we have quite a bit to delve into. And for those who, I know it's like on this podcast where we just published our 600th episode, but for those who are new to Ayurveda, why don't you describe a little bit about what Ayurveda is and how you got sucked down the rabbit hole?
Sure. I do want to say the first time I heard about you, Cate, was in 2015. And I was studying Ayurveda with Dr. Vasant Lad at his Gurukula program in Pune, India. And Jennifer was one of my teachers there, and Jennifer Ayers. And she had mentioned that she had been involved with someone like in Wyoming, and she had met you, and you were like, come on my podcast. And I was like, I've heard of Cate Stillman. And then we all did a deep dive into you. And I was like, oh my God, she's amazing. So that was about 8 years ago that you came.
I remember that. Jennifer was like, she'd been working with Dr. Ladd at the Ayurvedic Institute and was teaching in the Gurukula program for a while. And she and I were in that Gurukula program back in 2004 in India. That's where we first met. And she happened to be just like driving through, like trying to find her next phase. And I was in the middle of the Ayurveda Summit. And I just like sucked her into the closet. I was like doing all these podcasts in the closet. And I'm like, sit down and like, let's talk about the Ayurvedic practitioner journey. So that's hilarious that ended up with you guys having a conversation, and then here we are today.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. And I love Jennifer, and I'm so grateful for what you've been doing for Ayurveda forever. I started my journey into Ayurveda was in 2007 when I went to the Chopra Center in California to do a program they had called Perfect Health, and it included a 10-day panchakarma. And so I started, so I did that program, and it was really amazing. And I had like this personal transformation of losing, I lost 60 pounds with Ayurveda back then in 2007, 2008.
Wow.
And 80 points of my cholesterol, and such personal, it was, I guess, a transformation in many ways, but Ayurveda just spoke to me as a way of life that made so much sense. And that's why I went into becoming a practitioner and studying with everybody I could and so on. And I guess the thing that was so great about Ayurveda for me is that Ayurveda really looks at the individual person. As you said, like to give a little background, 5,000-year-old system of healing from India. And it, it's still practiced, of course, in India and now thankfully around the world in many places. But Ayurveda was the first medical system ever created. And I think it started with ophthalmology and surgery and gerontology and pediatrics and even mental health. And this was 5,000 years ago in India. And those great teachers saw how individual people were, and that people were made of the building blocks of nature, which we call the 5 Mahabhutas, the great building blocks, really the great elements of nature, including space, air, water, fire, and earth. And so we all have that within us as well as outside of us. We're all made up of a little bit differently, like some with more air, some with more fire, some with more earth. And Ayurveda helps you figure out where you fall into that spectrum and how to do, and if you're out of balance, how to sort of do the opposite of which of these constitutions we call the dosha, which of these doshas you have too much of, or where you're out of balance, to create balance. And since these are also in the elements outside of us, Ayurveda is very seasonal. It's very nature-based, which I love, obviously, because I live in very much nature, and we love that. And I have a dog sleeping behind me and birds all around me. And, just immersing ourselves in nature helps us find balance and harmony in our own being when we're aware, when we have great awareness of that. So that's sort of basically a little story of Ayurveda and my involvement in it.
So when you think back to like who you were before finding Ayurveda and doing the detox and learning the daily habits and the perfect health program or at the Chopra Center and your whole path, like when you think about like your beliefs and what you were thinking that you maybe had power over, control over, or the ability to steer your life and where you're now.
Mm-hmm.
Like what are the biggest differences in that? Just so that people can maybe relate and maybe identify some of their own beliefs.
It's really interesting. My first gut reaction is like, oh, I was great. Does Ayurveda make me better? But I'm kind of like digging more into that, who I was. And I see a person that I don't like the word struggle, but I can't think of a better one right now. I struggled with my weight for like years and years. And I think what I'm coming to in my writing process, not just writing books on Ayurveda, but writing essays and memoir and so on, is looking at the period of my life in my teens, 20s, and 30s when I was bulimic. And I, like so many of us, I had, now they call it disordered eating, which I kind of like that term rather than eating disorder. But I would diet until I lost like a lot of weight. And then all those restrictions made my body totally freak out. And I would need to binge eat. And then I would become bulimic. I would throw up and have like these bouts of bulimia. And it was just, of course, it was very distressing. And I couldn't find that balance in there. Like, how can I maintain a healthy weight? I don't care about being skinny. I'm like, what I know now is I'm kapha dosha. I'm round and curvy and soft and, plush, comfortable and cozy and all those words. And I love that. But, I just had to learn how to not balloon up to 240 pounds because that is not healthy and that does not feel good. And dieting, using honestly things like Weight Watchers and so on, where it was very, very, I just restricted, and you get on a scale and you face these people every week and you freak out that day that you're going to do that and wear the lightest weight clothes you possibly can. And your whole week rests on that moment when someone says, oh, you lost half a pound. And you're like, fuck, half a pound. I worked so hard. And, it was just like, it was just disheartening. And so I would say I was a person that.
And so disconnected, right? Like when you say that, it's like, oh my gosh, it's it's like, it's feeding the problem with the problem.
And so much of my life revolved around that. And there was so much more to do than think about that. And so I would go through periods in my life where I would be like, fuck it, I don't care about my weight. And it's just going to be what it is. And those were okay times. That was okay. But I got to a point, in my 40s where I was no longer bulimic. My bulimia stopped in my early 30s through ways I'm investigating now, trying to understand. But I'm very thankful for that ended. But in my early 40s, I was like, this is just like, I don't feel like a person. I think then I was about 220. I'm like, I don't feel like a person who should weigh 220. It just doesn't feel right on my body. And I had a bookstore then. I had a new age bookshop, metaphysical bookstore called Breathe Books. My bookstore was awesome. And I had an Ayurveda
Was this in Baltimore?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I had it for a decade. And then I had like, and I was a vegetarian since I was 16, and I had been doing yoga and I had been doing meditation, and then just trying to make peace with my body. and which was okay. I mean, it was okay. But when I, started stocking my bookstore and I learned about Ayurveda, which I only learned through my bookstore, I pulled books off. I think, oh no, I had read Deepak Chopra's book in the early 90s, um, Ageless Body, Timeless Mind, or whichever way it goes. That was actually my first, thing, but so that stuck in the back of my mind. So, but when I got to this point, in the early 2000s, I really took those books off, took them home, took a dosha quiz, and I saw things that made so much sense about who I was. I sort of had elements like everyone does of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, but my Kapha was really holding me down, covering my heart. I mean, I could really feel like my heart was covered with something, and I had ama moving through my body. Ama is like toxic residue. It's literally undigested food still in your body that's causing blockages in your channels, in your circulatory channels, but also in your mind. And I saw my vata had me moving, jumping from one relationship to another, one thing to another. Everything started to make sense to me in this world. Crazy. I'm just like this Jewish girl here in Baltimore, and suddenly this Indian science of health and healing made more sense to me than anything I'd heard in 4 decades of my life. And so that's when I dove into it. And by reducing the weight, I reduced excess kapha in my mind and body. I began to see the world much more clearly. And it's sort of like I had this Ayurvedic fairy tale. A man walked into my bookstore, which many did, lots of them did. But suddenly this one, I was like, wow, this is the guy. And then we got married and we've been together 15 years. And, but I really feel it's because I removed that layer that was covering me, my eyes, my heart, my body. It really, honestly, is not about the weight loss. That was just like a side effect of learning how to balance my doshas. And it's just been an extraordinary Ayurvedic journey.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love hearing the stories, and I just can so relate to a lot of it. Like when I think back to when I was in school at the California College of Ayurveda and the Iyengar Yoga Institute. They both had 2-year programs. And I was in there from like 1999 to 2001. And I'd go back and forth. I'd commute between the schools each week. And, it's like there's this part of me that also I can really relate to what you said in the beginning. It's like, oh, it was good and just got better. And it's like, no. Like the truth of the matter is like, I was really in my mind about my body. Like I was really in that trying to feed myself from the cognitive function instead of this really deeply embodied experience, this embodied tissue that was in sync. And it was the it was like the undigested or the partially digested or the maldigested, I feel like is an even better word, of the habits of modern culture and the trauma of modern culture and all the stuff that happens. And the more I do my work, my healing journey, the more I really am awake to how disconnected our mothers were in the birth process. And that's where I really find that like a lot of this trauma of disconnect from our constitution, disconnect from our power, disconnect from our ability to digest it really happened within like the first month, maybe the first day of life out of the womb.
Well, that's what we say in Ayurveda, you have your Prakriti and your Vikriti, and your Prakriti is your natural born Ayurvedic dosha. And then your Vikriti is where you're out of balance. And I often write in my books, that might have happened while you're in the womb. That might have happened the day you're born. We don't, it's not just like when you're 16 and going through puberty that you get out of balance. There's a lot more that contributes to it beforehand. So I think you're right.
Yeah, and the sense of like you're saying, like the unlayering or the unpeeling is the healing process. This like discovering who you are from within and letting the vikruti or letting the layers of and dimensions of imbalance just be digested by the light of consciousness and then they dissolve. It's like and I do a lot of writing on fasting, on intermittent fasting and meal spacing and fast mimicking diet and it goes in the science of autophagy and apoptosis is like what happens when you're not eating, but the light of consciousness is just, shining within the cells. And the cells break the cells break down, or they break down components within the cell. So within the cell is autophagy, and within an entire cell is apoptosis. And then all molecular parts are then upcycled to the higher function of the organism.
Wow.
Right? Isn't that exactly what happens?
I never knew those words, but I know what you mean. And I don't do a lot of fasting besides, like, I finished my last meal at night around 6 or 7, a light meal, and then I don't eat again until about like 10 or 11 the next morning.
Yeah.
And I consciously stop eating early at night, but I'm not hungry until that time in the morning, and I eat when I'm hungry. So I know that actually has a benefit, because for me, then I end up eating 2 meals during the day. I just have, that sort of 11 o'clock meal.
And that is like after 13 hours without food, you hit autophagy. So you're getting, it sounds like you have a 16-hour fast time and an 8-hour eating window. Okay. And so that's naturally you're getting 3 hours every 24-hour cycle of autophagy and apoptosis. So yay.
So do I
yay
have
for you.
The light of
so you're doing it.
Shining?
You're doing it. Yes. You're
doing
it.
Awesome.
Okay, so let's dive. Yeah, I know, right? And it is natural. I mean, and that's the whole point. I feel like, as people do intermittent fasting, and we do a lot with intermittent fasting for your body type. You guys, I'll put a link in the show notes for our little 2-page guide on it. As people do it, they notice exactly what you said before, like all this energy that was going into food, into like, what am I going to eat? What am I not going to eat? Like all that, like, when am I going to eat? What are we going to eat? Blah, 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 blah. Like it just goes away. And all of a sudden, we wake up to like, wow, I have a lot of time. And then, wow, I have a lot of space. And then it's like, wow, I feel really focused and calm and relaxed in myself. Like I get svasta, I get that seated in the self without this like constant craving. And that just the craving itself gets digested as the adipose tissue digests the endocrine disrupting chemicals that are driving so many of the cravings, et cetera, et cetera.
And, there's something else to that. What you're saying is that not thinking about food, should I eat what, and so on. But it's also losing this self-judgment and criticism, like, I'm bad. That was a bad choice. I ate poorly today. Or, oh my God, I'm so good. I made khichdi. Or like, it's getting rid of that judgment around what we're eating to nourish ourselves. Because I think when we feel this way, we automatically lean towards the nourishing foods. Or if we lean towards foods that aren't so nourishing, we know that maybe there was a reason for it. And we can look at that emotional eating, for what it was. Like, why did I just go for that? But without saying like, oh, I'm so bad. And that's a big thing that I'm working with in my writing now, is this like being bad and good around your food choices. And that's also getting rid of that and having more time for other things in your life.
Totally. I'm glad you mentioned that, 'cause I'm going to put a link in the show notes too we have an emotional eating workshop with emotional eating.
That's great. Yeah.
We'll put that in there. And it's all in Ayurveda.
Yeah.
There's this sense, right, of like, you're actually digesting a identity, right? And like every time you write a book, or every time you go into your creative writing workshops with your people, right? It's like, there's this old identity that's outdated, and it's just having time and space and light to digest. And then the emergent is of a higher order. And I find what's so cool about Ayurveda and yoga is it's like, this is a system that gets this and has language for it, and has language around diagnostics and pathogenesis and a variety of, like, an infinite variety of treatment, where it's not like there's one cure to cancer. It's like, no, there's like 1,000 cures to cancer. There's like 1,000 cures to the autoimmune diseases. There's 1,000 cures to weight loss, right? It's like the infinite, and it's in the connection of understanding, right? That we have to like just sort of like slow down and watch what's happening, and just the simple pausing and allowing, in that reflection, like the water element allowing us to reflect or look back, and that awakening of intuition I guess that's what I want to say to this is like, you guys, it's like, this is all in this healing science. It's not like piecing together a bunch of traditions. It's like within this one tradition itself, and it welcomes the other traditions. Like it makes room for the others.
Definitely. When I first started studying Ayurveda, one of my first teachers was Amadea Morningstar.
Oh,
And she's one of my favorite people in the world. And I took a cooking class with her at Kripalu in 2008 was the first time. And after that, we so many classes and workshops. And then we started teaching together over the years and holding retreats here in Maryland. She's amazing. In her cookbook, the Ayurveda cookbook, she has a section on taste and emotion. So in Ayurveda, we look at having 6 tastes with every meal: sweet, sour, salty, pungent, bitter, and astringent. And Amadea did this really cool thing of putting together, like if you crave sweet, if you crave astringent, if you don't want bitter, like what are the emotions that it connects to? And so that so resonated with me that I dived into it, because I've been in consulting since 2008, and I've seen, hundreds and hundreds of clients. And I see this, what they crave and how it's connected, the taste that they crave, how it's connected to their dosha and emotions. And in my first book, The Ayurveda Beginner's Guide, I have a really great section expanding on Amadea's work with her consent. About this. And so, for instance, let's say a person really craves sweet. Very simply, we look at, are they not getting enough sweetness in their life? Are they not able to offer sweetness? Is their heart closed? What do they need to do in order? It's not really the food. It's not the ice cream that they're craving. It's a healthy relationship or a dog or something like that. And so, that's sort of a simplistic one to describe it. It's,
well, I'll follow up on that, because like my daughter was she's going through for like just like teenager stuff, and she's like, I want to see how much I can shift this from just not eating sugar. So then what happened was my husband and I realized just like how much like just sugar was just in the house, and then we both took it on too. It's just like, and I was probably eating the least amount in the 3, or I'd use like date sugar, or not date sugar, I'd use dates, essentially to make things and whatnot. But we really just looked at what happens if, and I noticed so many things happen that were just like this part of this like ancestral tradition of like, oh, it's such the quick fix. Like I'll bake the cake, I'll make banana bread, I'll bake some, and I was like, oh wow. So we just like let go of baking for a while. Like just totally let go of like, and I could notice the impulse of like, I want to bake a cake for this weekend. Like I want to celebrate my people. Right. And it was like, okay, but my daughter had taken that off the table. So it was like, okay, we're not going to do that. So then it pushed so many relationship issues to the surface.
Wow.
So that now we're able to get it in relationship. Yeah, I know. It's pretty wild to
that
see.
That is worth writing an essay about. I'm just going to close my window because I think someone's mowing the lawn. So I just, we don't need to hear that. Okay.
So do you want to go through all 6 tastes with us and what people might be missing? I feel like that, like everyone's going to want to know. Can you do it kind of quickly? Like what happens when someone's craving bitter or punch or spice or?
I'd probably have to get my book to remember everything, but like someone who is craving, let's say someone who is craving bitter or prefers the bitter foods, they're usually vata dosha. So they're usually a little bit dry and tight and sort of, in a way, just like keeping everything close. Although vata can also be very expansive and have a lot of movement, but there's a part of vata that has a lot of fear and anxiety and worry. And so craving bitter just sort of feeds that anxiety and worry. It doesn't taste very good, but bitter is also very detoxifying, but vata doesn't have a lot to detox in their bodies quite often. And so they're just sort of feeding that resentment and anger and worry and so on by consuming more bitter when there's really no need for the body to have so much, because vata should look to eat more sweet, sour, and salty and less bitter, pungent, astringent. The same with astringent. It creates something that's, tighter and puckery and so on. And so you just sort of have to look at, the cravings and the aversions as well. Like somebody who has an aversion to eating sweet foods could really be the type of person who's just like pushing people away. Why is that? Why do they not want that sweetness in their life? And often that is Vata, because Vata tends to eat those cold, raw foods and salads and so on, and dry foods and crackers, and find it's very hard to nourish themselves at that point. Where sweet foods and sour and so on, they're easier to digest and they're more highly caloric, and that's what somebody with a Vata imbalance really needs. But they tend to go for the opposite. Like Kapha really loves the sweet, sour, and salty, which builds more Kapha in their system. So they're just feeding themselves what they already know and what they already have. And leaning towards the bitter, pungent, and astringent means that Kapha needs to stick up for themselves. Suddenly they need to like voice what they need. Where Kapha is all about taking care of everybody else. They're just like, oh, I'm okay. I'm fine. I don't need my oxygen mask, right? I'll put yours on first. And so they resist doing this thing that's going to help them speak their needs more, which is once Kapha starts detoxifying, they start clarifying their mind and body, even doing things like in Panchakarma or other Ayurvedic treatments, like Ridbhasti and Netrabhasti, doing things that like pouring ghee in the eyes, pouring ghee or herbalized oil around the heart that are opening, sort of detoxifying and opening procedures that you can have in Ayurveda. Kapha might resist that because they don't want to see. They just want to nest and hoard and just be in their own space. So it's complicated and beautiful, and it makes perfect sense when you look at it. But as we know, Ayurveda is a system of opposites. So if we have too much of too much cold, then we eat warm. If we have too much warm, then we eat cooling. So it's very logical, and everyone can follow it.
It really made me think too when you're talking about Vata, because I was actually I have another podcast on this with anorexia nervosa with a teenager. And one of the things I realized was that like part of the reason that Vatas might eat so light, and I hadn't like learned this in school or in my practitionership or any of that, but it was just one of these like, oh, aha moments where you're like, oh, that makes so much sense. Is if you live in a culture that doesn't understand seasonal eating and food combining, and Vata has really poor digestion, so they might eat foods that are like quote unquote good for you or have more caloric density, but they can't digest them. So then there's pain and discomfort and this feeling of being bloated and weighed down. And that feels so uncomfortable because they're light like a hummingbird. So it's like the Kapha wouldn't even notice, or the Pitta wouldn't even notice, but the Vata just feels like there's just a ton of bricks, right? And I love that in your, in your home remedies guide and your Ayurvedic beginner's guide, that there's like a real, this is actually how to eat foods so that you can digest them for all the different body types. And that, that introduction to like, okay, it's not just eat your spinach. It's like for a Vata, it's like eat your spinach that's like coated in,
ghee,
olive oil or ghee. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Sauteed. Don't just grab it out of the bag.
So let's just talk a little bit about how you structured the beginner's guide to Ayurvedic home remedies with sleep. So I'm just going to go through the chapters. We have sleep, pain, respiratory system, digestion, skin, reproductive system, and caring for yourself and others at every age. I feel like I just know from like a writer's perspective, sometimes it can be challenging to figure out how all the information is organized and the content layout. How did this book come to be?
Well, I just really thought about like the 3 pillars of health in Ayurveda and sort of how that affects the body. And we talk about sleep and food, and so the structure of the book is, so let's say like this is the beginning of the sleep section, and sleep to me is the king of all the pillars of health. Because we don't have good sleep, we don't detoxify, we don't assimilate our nutrients, and we can't make good decisions. But what I thought about was how do we have these sort of what are the things you can do in your life to make these things work? So one was, my book is separated into lifestyle, food, and apothecary. So like for good sleep, you look at all the lifestyle things a person can do. And I include in here Vastu Shastra, which is sort of like the feng shui of Ayurveda. So lifestyle things like how to create a bedroom that's more, conducive to good sleep. What direction should your bed be facing? When you should stop reading your phone and tablets. And then let's say food, there's different foods. Some doshas actually don't sleep well on a very empty stomach and might do well with a little bit of carbohydrates before sleep, but just a little bit. But others really require an empty stomach for good sleep. And then the apothecary is like the herbalized oils and the supplements and things we would take. So let's say for sleep, we use something called bringaraj oil. Oh, I have a dog here. Sorry. Bring garage oil on the scalp which helps you sleep. Taking valerian root, chamomile, using lavender essential oil, and so on. So the book is. I'm sorry, my dog. Hold on one sec. I think she might venture out. Sorry, that's actually my dog from India. I found her next to Dr. Lad's Gurukula. I'm sorry, she went out, so I can't take a picture of her, but all over my Instagram and Facebook is Junie. She was chained up to a tree next to Dr. Lad's place in Pune, and I found her the first day I was there for a 6-week program. I fell in love with her and got her into a foster home and brought her home 8 years ago. So she's my awesome dog to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that India is awesome for those things. But anyway, so the book is broken. So I looked at like how do we live, basically, and what happens to us, what goes wrong. And so, so many things go wrong with coming like from, I also studied a lot of Buddhism, like sort of like what's the right lifestyle, the wrong lifestyle, and so on, like what is the right path. And if we do things that harm ourselves, like things even like greed and sloth and so on, it just harms our health, and there's no two ways about it. And so I think having good sleep, eating good food, and using great rejuvenative therapies help us make better decisions about our lives. And so when we do fall into imbalance and our body has pain, or we have digestive issues, or we have skin problems, there are things in Ayurveda that we can do to sort of tweak our lifestyle to get back on that right path without being like preachy or anything. Like stuff happens, But so how do we get back there, and how do we heal ourselves? And then going into menopause and andropause, which is male menopause. Ayurveda has plenty of things for that. To help you through those natural stages of life. I don't look at anything like that. Can you still hear my dog?
Yeah, no, it's okay though. Keep going.
How some people want to stave off menopause and take, hormone replacement therapy and so on. Maybe some people need that. Maybe they have terrible, terrible hot flashes and they just can't function in life, and maybe it helps them get over a hurdle or something. But there are also ways, if we give it time Ayurvedically, to help to relieve those things. And also Ayurveda works on a really cool process of knowing how deeply embedded a problem is, a disease is. So let's say just like an autoimmune or cancer or something, like how far down into the layers of the tissue it has gone. And so we say we have 7 layers of tissue. And if we're able to address something early on before it gets really deeply embedded, if we're able to live a healthier lifestyle, moving, breathing, eating fresh foods and so on, then it's more likely than not that that the disease is not going to become deeply embedded into our system, so that we can heal faster. We still might get sick, but hopefully we'll be able to heal faster. And so I include a lot of case studies in the book, which is really fun. I sort of took combinations of my clients' menopause. It took me because, boy, what better subject than yourself? Because I'm 60 now, which I love. And so I'm I'm done with like a lot of the menopausal stuff. I'm into this phase now, sort of the Vata phase of life, where you start drying up. And so what do you do then? Like, how you're oiling your body or eating estrogenic foods, things like that. you learn all this in Ayurveda so that you can grow old really well. You can grow old and be healthy and die aware and awake and without your body falling apart. So that's my goal, is to die really well.
Amen.
To live
Live
really
well, die
well
well.
before then. I want to live
Yeah.
great before then, but I don't want to die in pieces. I've seen that happen to too many people, and I don't want that to happen to any of my loved ones or myself.
There's such a good word that has recently come up in the scientific literature, and it's health span. And it's really this differentiation between health span and lifespan, right? It's like we want to live well, we want to die well, and there's a real understanding of it's not a longevity game. Like that's not really, and sometimes people really think that with Ayurveda, and it's like, well, I don't want to do all that work, right? Like I don't have to make all these changes. I don't want to do that work. But then when it comes to like, wait, if my health span gets better every day, right? And then as a, net benefit of that, it's like then lifespan does increase, right? But the real goal, I feel like for so many people right now, is recovering health span. And there's a lot of misconception about that in aging. And so having people like you writing about like, this is what 60 should look like. This is what 60 should feel like. Like this is by design. Right. And if it's not this good, then you fucked up the design, which don't worry, like we can get it back.
You can fix it. The body is very forgiving. It can really be forgiving, and we can get things back on track. Even something as simple as doing some breath work. Even something as simple as sitting down in the morning and doing alternate nostril breathing or meditating for 5 minutes. Just, we start with really small baby steps, drinking some warm water in the morning rather than coffee right away. And I'm not saying don't have coffee. I do have coffee. It's not like that's the devil's elixir, but it's like balancing these things out, doing small things. Like I say to my clients, like if you can eat 3 meals a day with no snacks in between, let's just do that. Then I'll talk to you about the contents of the meals later. Let's just, because most people in the West just eat all day long. And then the body has no break, no time to detox in between meals. And so I try to, what's the path of least resistance? How can I sort of break in without saying, oh no, you can't eat like deli meat. You can't eat this. You've got to stop. Well, drinking soda and smoking is like they do have to stop that right away. But finding the way in to work with them. And this is what I find is like, let's just do the 3 meals a day, no snacks. And then let's talk about what you're eating in those meals. And then let's talk about making it seasonal. Let's talk about doing some breath work. Let's get you moving a little bit every day, like really slow, because you want this to last your whole life and just become this is how you live your life. That's how you consciously live your life. You do a little bit of movement, a little bit of breathing, a little bit of meditation. You don't eat processed foods, and then you see the benefits of it, and it works beautifully.
And there's this sense of like, it's like as the imbalances get digested and fall away, you fall in love with yourself. Like you fall in love with life, right? Isn't that, I'm like, that's what I find
true.
Really.
I love that. That's really yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about writing. Let's talk about writing and the writing process, because we both seem to be writing and into books historically. And it's an interesting time for books, I feel like right now, because like there's more writing than ever. There's more people publishing than ever. And there's a lot of different reasons to write. And so it sounds like you're leading people through writing retreats as part of their healing journeys.
Yeah, definitely.
And we can talk a little bit about that and like the difference between like writing to be read versus writing to reveal oneself to oneself.
Oh, that's a beautiful way to put it. And I'll add something when you just talked about the world of writing. There's also many, many different ways to publish now. You don't have to go with, although I am with traditional publishers, you don't have to be with traditional publishers. There's so many ways to do hybrid publishing, get your work out there. You don't need someone else to judge your work and say that's good enough to publish. You can do it yourself. And there's so many venues and avenues to do that, including just online things like medium.com. Get yourself a Substack newsletter. There's just so many ways to get your word out for free without having to go through like an agent who sells it to somebody maybe, and then they all criticize you and judge you and really can shut you down. I'm really lucky that I all of my books are completely different than what I proposed. The publisher would say, we love this idea, but we really want it to look like this. So then I'd have to change it. And I was cool with that. I didn't really have an ego with changing it to please the publisher. It got me 3 books done, and they're beautiful books. So I'm happy with it. But the type during, or actually just before COVID in February 2020, I went to take a creative writing retreat. And because I just had this urge, I was like, I'm writing these books. I want to do something a little bit more personal. Perhaps all my editors would say, when you write your personal stories in the books, it's fantastic. So I was like, how do I do that? Like, I didn't even know how to do that. And so I started with this creative writing. I took these classes with a method called Gateless, Gateless, a woman named Suzanne Kingsbury, who runs these retreats. And it's all about, we meditate, you get a prompt, and then you write for a certain period of time, and then you share with the group what you're doing in a retreat or on a Zoom session or so on. You share what you wrote. And then the magic is like in this feedback, because people listen very intently to your work, and then they give you this feedback that's super positive. No judgment, no criticism, no, like, you should do this, you should do that, or it would be better if you did this, or I want to know more about that. It's all about, I loved when you talked about the trees, that place where you talked about your personal struggle with, or the writer, because we don't make it personal. So we don't know if people are writing fiction or nonfiction, and we don't want people to be, it's not like a confessional. Yeah. So we're just like, I love when the writer talked about that struggle with the so-and-so, and it really touched me. The words they used, the alliteration, the description, it was so vivid. I felt like I was there. So we just give all this positive feedback, and that encourages the writer to keep going, because there's nothing worse than having a writing facilitator or teacher say to you, no, you didn't do that right. Go back and work on that again. Give me more of this or more of that. Then you completely shut the person down. That right. Shuts the flow of creativity down completely. So through these methods of positive reinforcement, the writer hears what people love in their work, and it encourages them to go more towards that place. Of course, there comes a time when you have to have a little bit of workshopping and professional, it's not really professional criticism, but it's professional encouragement for which direction to go in, and, sort of helping a little bit. But that's what I do. And I found that it's also very dosha specific. Vata, Pitta, and Kapha all write in different ways, and they need feedback in different ways. You have to really be careful with how you talk to each dosha in order to encourage that and not shut them down. Pitta can be very self-critical and very perfectionistic. And so you have to really work with the Pitta to help them just flow and not edit as they write, and just let it pour out of them. And so on. And so I started doing these Zoom retreats, and then in-person retreats. And now I have my first international retreat in Iceland in October, where it filled up so rapidly that I had to add a second week. So I still have 2 places in my second week, which is the end of October, first week of November. And that's on the website. I took people to India for years for Ayurveda. For a dozen years, I took groups to India to travel and also experience Ayurveda. And since COVID, though, I really wanted to go someplace that was a little bit easier, where you don't have to have shots. You can eat the food, you can sit on the toilets and so on. And there are toilets to actually sit on. But and you can drink the water from the faucet. And I'd been to Iceland, and I have a colleague in Iceland, an Ayurveda colleague in Iceland, who went to the Kerala School of Ayurveda. And so she's helping me lead this retreat. So we do combine Ayurveda with writing and touring. And I think just filling ourselves up with nature, the unknown, the wildness. Iceland's amazing, and that sort of feeds the flow of creativity as well. So that's where I think I'm taking this new direction of Ayurveda, and then writing more personal stories. Like I mentioned, the bulimia. I'm really looking into the sort of like eating disorders and self discovery and who we are and why we are the way we are. And I'm finding a lot of that through my personal writing.
That's amazing. So with the different, I love like the different types. And so let's go back into that a little bit with, because one of the things that I've really noticed in my writing process is I started with independent publishing and then I went with a publisher and now I'm back to independent publishing and I'm allowing so much more, I would say vata, like so much more unstructured, expansive creativity.
Mm.
And and storytelling and not needing it to like writing as process and healing, but then also as exposure to like the inside, right? So kind of
Mhm.
more memoir oriented, of where
Mhm.
it's like it doesn't need to be so informational driven. It doesn't need to, and which I think is going to be really
Research. Yeah.
yeah, research driven. Like my last book on Inflamed was so research driven. And it was because people were like, we really, basically we wanted like the science behind urine therapy was the main motivator for that. And it was like, well, okay. So I just learned and it was great. It was like writing as learning experience as well.
Mhm.
But there is just this level of being able to share from the lived experience and create art. And I'm pretty involved with AI right now in my company and with marketing and with and it's helping a lot. Like it's really there's a lot of really really great things
Mhm.
about AI. But if we're
Mhm.
just looking to like process informational or create informational based writing, like don't worry, AI's got that, uh, for the most part. And so to me, what it's like, where's the human differentiate? Like what's the human differentiating factor? That's the
Mhm.
one to me that's like going to be more and more important in the future.
I think you're right because AI can't write my personal essay. It can't write my personal story. It can't write who I was at 10. It can't write about my yellow Formica table with the black and white TV on it in my kitchen when I was a little girl, right? It can't write about my
Yeah.
pink snowsuit and getting lost in the snowdrift. It doesn't know that. It doesn't know my feelings of abandonment or being, left out. And so that is where we have to go within, and we need to share those stories with others because people
Yeah.
relate to it. And so, like a Vata person might have a lot of fears and anxiety and worry, as we say that Vata, can have, but also Vata is highly creative and very spontaneous, and they're all over the place. So for a Vata to sit down, for a Vata person to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to set a timer for 15 minutes and I'm going to explore this one issue. That helps keep the Vata focused, but within that focus, they can go anywhere in that story. And no one's going to say, no, 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 don't go over there. They have 15 minutes to go anywhere they want in that story. And
Mhm.
that's really, really helpful. And then like for a Pitta person, the same thing. We give instructions like don't edit your work, like keep the pen moving.
Mhm.
Like if you tell a pitta to do something, they're up for the challenge. They want to do it. So you're like, keep
Yeah.
that pen moving, don't stop, or keep your
Yeah.
fingers on the keyboard, don't stop. So then they
Yeah.
won't stop to edit themselves, and what they allow to come out, like the heat of pitta can just like, burn the page, and just like incredible stories can come out that way. And kapha dosha doesn't really have much of a problem sitting down somewhere for a certain period of time and writing and taking, their time, but actually giving them the time limit helps them to move a little bit faster because,
Mm.
kapha's slow and steady and they get there. And if they
Yeah.
want to keep writing for a half hour, an hour, beautiful. But sometimes within a class setting, letting them know that you need to pour this out now, not sit there and think about it or ruminate on it or have a cup of tea and a piece of toast. We have to like sort of like get that moving. So there's different ways to ignite each dosha within the
Yeah.
process, and they hear it differently. They hear the prompt differently. They hear the work differently, and
Mm.
that's expressed on the page, and it's beautiful what appears. It's just incredible. And AI, nobody can replicate no one can write your story. Only you can write. And your story needs to be heard. I don't really know how much longer Earth is going to last with the way things are going on our planet. And so I think it's actually really crucial right now that we get these stories down and out there to share so people can feel humanity, feel connected, feel loved and heard, that they're special, that everybody is special. And everybody's story is needed, is necessary.
Yeah, totally. It brings back memories of like when I first wrote Body Thrive, which is 10 Habits of Yoga and Ayurveda. It was like my answer to coaching. Dina Charya was like, here, read the book, and it really helped.
Yeah.
That was my main motivator, was like, I didn't want to explain earlier, lighter, dinner, again, after like a decade and a half of doing that.
I know,
like,
right?
Just read chapter 3. But it worked great. And the book club and the yoga health coaches use it. And now in Wellness Pro Academy, the wellness pros that want to use it with their members. But it was very much that I like signed up for a writing retreat, and we were writing 500 words every 15 minutes for 3 days. And doing like vocalization and breathing practices. So like one room was for like vocalization and breathing practices, and the other room was like just you and the laptop. And it was at this like ugly ass hotel because they didn't want us to be distracted.
Wow.
So it was just like very much like nature deprivation. Like everything was just like go, and the food was not great. Like there's no distractions, It was like the prison of you and your book. And, sure enough, I think I wrote 40,000 words in 3 days, and I had a rough draft to edit. And then and it took me 10 months to edit it while running my company and raising my child and doing all the things. But it was really, to me, really spoke to the power of retreat and the writing process. And it built, and I only did it once, but boy, it really, if I look back in all the books that I've created, it's like, wow, it really created a discipline within writing. And I do love the whole dosha, because I am Pitta Kapha, and the Kapha part of me just does absolutely love to just like hunker down and get into the app. And I use Vellum, which I'm actually in conversation with Vellum, the app creator for Mac. It only works on Mac, but it's actually a publishing app that does Kindle in print formatting.
Wow.
But it just works 10 times better than like Scrivener or Microsoft Word or like anything else I've used. The only problem I run into is with editing, with hiring an editor. So I'm self-editing mostly, which is totally nuts. And I wouldn't recommend that for most people. But between Grammarly, AI, Vellum, it's like so much too, right? For me right now, just with this next book, The Witch's Cancer Journal, with that, I'm just so into not wanting input, like not wanting someone else's, like not wanting to be affected, because it's a journal, right? And just like letting it be whatever it is. And it doesn't need to be in anything. Like none of my books, I feel like, need to be in anything. And that is so freeing. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't need to be a bestseller. It doesn't need to be a blah, blah, blah.
I don't know if it's okay in your podcast for me to ask you a question, but you've mentioned the Cancer Journal before to me in messages. I wonder if you want to tell us all a little bit about it.
At this point, it's going to be like, that's all I'm releasing. I'm going to do like little pre-launch on Amazon. So we'll put a link to pre-sell for that. And other than that, I'm not really disclosing anything.
All right, I thought I'd give you an
opportunity. You will get an advance copy.
Okay.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. So your way of describing that writing retreat you went to is like unbelievable for writing a book. That is amazing.
Yeah, and that's what the deal was. Right. Like it was Tom Bird, and it was like write your book. It was literally write your book in a weekend. And I think it was for people that were honestly, half the people, they were having trouble finishing a book. And then other people like me were just like, oh my gosh, this has been building up for years. I just need to sit down and like literally, like, I don't mean puke it out, but kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah, vomit it on the page.
Vomit it on the page.
Vomit it on the page. and
And
you
I'm
edit it
curious
later.
to go back now, Susan, because I want to go back and read the
Right.
original manuscript because it
Right.
got so highly edited. And
Right.
because it got so highly edited, Sounds True Publishing then picked it up and we did very few edits. Like we did I mean, it took us 2 hours to edit the book. Once they picked,
Mm,
it was nothing, right? Like just, it was mostly citations. It was like
right.
nothing. And to me though, I'm more curious about the pre-editorial process because my guess is in there,
Yeah.
it's so much more rich with
Yeah.
stories and client stories and not
Right.
just information.
And that's what people want because that's how they relate. And so, like on my retreats, like it's not about writing a book and it's not for writers, although you can be a writer, but it's for just people to use this writing practice as a way of self discovery, as a way of looking at the stuff that you've been hiding under layers and layers and layers of kapha, pitta, and vata, perhaps, and how to let that out and realize you don't have to be afraid of anything. Because people just have a lot of fears of writing about like their mother or their sister or whatever. And so this method of writing is helps people to clarify their thoughts and emotions and to just because all that ama that's just sort of staying within us, undigested thoughts, we can get them out on the page and see, wow, the sky didn't fall. I expressed myself and it's still okay. So then there's so many different ways to use these processes. Yeah, it's
And my
great.
guess is that I mean, just in hearing what you're saying, because in Coaching Wellness Pro Academy, I'm like, so many people have imposter syndrome. So many people have trouble with telling their
Mm.
stories. So many people are self-employed, right? Especially in the healing world. There's very few real jobs in the consumer
Yeah, I
health
haven't worked for
industry,
anyone
and
for a long time. Yeah,
right. And
right.
so it's like just being able to realize what stories you're willing to share, like what stories you can tell, and then which ones you're willing to share. To me, that's a process that every entrepreneur, every solopreneur, every wellnesspreneur like actually goes through that process. And that my guess is that doing a retreat like yours would very much accelerate that and process,
Yeah,
like you said, like process a lot of the blockage, the shadow, the ama, the resistance, depending on which system you come from, whatever word you want to use, the
right.
junk in the trunk that gets in the way of who you really are.
And there's also, oh, so amazing being 60. I just turned 60 in May. And it's, and also this stage of life. So we look at life in Ayurveda, we have a Kapha, Pitta, and Vata stage of life. And the Vata stage of life, you really start to not give a shit what anybody thinks about you. And that is such a beautiful, like, notion because you can just start expressing yourself to with no end. There is no boundary. There's nobody stopping you from saying what you're really thinking and what you really think feeling. And the experiences that we tend to write about as we get older happened 30, 40, 50 years ago. And
Yeah.
so suddenly you're getting this perspective on these things that happen to you, whether as an entrepreneur or whatever it is in your life. What happened with that business? How did that fail? What did I lose or what did I gain or what was the gift? And, you just get this beautiful perspective as you age and then this courage. You just have incredible courage to just write it down and share it, which is why I mention bulimia in all of my books, just like a little bit, like in
Mm,
passing. But
yeah.
it's like, then I get like all these messages from people like, well, what happened? Tell me more about it. Why did you
Mm,
stop? How did you? And
mm,
I'm like, I don't know. Why did I stop? Like,
mm.
and then I was like, oh yeah, my dad died. I stopped when I was 32. My dad died when I was 32. There's got to be a connection. And like, whoa, what is that? And so just like, connecting the dots in your life and then telling people because they really do want to know. And so
Yeah.
that's, yeah. And then you're
And
not
it
scared to
invites
talk
them
about it.
deeper in. And that's what we kind of want. Like it's like the cliffhanger of the Netflix TV show, right? It's like it's better that, yeah, I love it. So many places to go. And the other thing I just want to say, and what I was hearing, whatever in the ethers when you were speaking, is like for so many of the elders that like life was so different. And we can see we can see this wave coming with AI. We can see these waves coming with like just the reorganization of power and money. And it's like the stories will die with the people unless they tell the stories.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And like,
Right.
what a great experience to be able to just go away and write some of the story, like write down how you want to be remembered or write down the stories that you don't want lost. in your ancestral lines or in, you know, your own creative journey through life. And to me, that's just, you know, I mean, because when you're gone and you don't know when, those stories die with us.
Right. Your unique way of expressing what happened to you. Yeah. That's really important. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, everyone, this has been Susan Weiss Bohlen, SUSANWEISBOHLEN.com, and Cate Stillman. Awesome. I'm so excited for people to get your book, The
Thank
Beginner's
you.
Guide
They
to
can get it
Ayurveda.
anywhere books are sold. It's everywhere. And you don't have to know about Ayurveda to follow anything in the book. It's everybody can follow it. Yeah.
Awesome.